poke if you need us to move along, or maybe spend a little bit more time or clarify something that you might be seeing as well. So, having that said, I am going to go ahead just a quick maybe foray into the Fidelity website. I've got maybe just a couple quick disclosures to get through. Albert, I don't think that you had put those up. Maybe you did for a minute. I'll let you introduce yourself. Did we keep the compliance folks happy enough with the disclosures, or should I flash them for a few seconds here?
Yeah, we're definitely all set, Peter. Thanks a lot. Yeah, glad to be here. A lot of good information today, I think, with regards to ETFs and how to find ETFs, and certainly a lot of tools we can do to get to that point. And obviously, it's going to be heavy today on demonstration. So, as Peter said, if you've got something you want to look at, if you've got a theme, Christine, I see your theme. We'll definitely try to incorporate that here as we go through these demos. But yeah, let us know. And if we're not hitting on something you want to learn about, or if we need to repeat something, just let us know. We're happy to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And Albert, I know you're going to kick some things off here in just a moment or two. Let me speak to a question, Christine. Like Albert said, we'll definitely try to factor that in as well. Ada, I think most of this historically has been on Fidelity's website. And the reason being is that, under news and research or under products is where there are a couple kind of main avenues, ETFs here under products, news and research. ETFs. I think Albert's going to take a look at markets and sectors, which I think is a great place to start as well. We've got different learning avenues. Um, Long story short, the Fidelity website, it really is able to go ahead and house a lot of information. Active Trader Pro, though, is going to excel in being able to maybe customize, maybe being able to set up different charting techniques. We can maybe touch on relative strength comparison, or at least just the theme behind that. That's more of a technical analysis, maybe trying to compare a couple different products. Maybe you had found a few different ETFs that you're considering. Maybe using Active Trader Pro to chart some things or do a relative strength comparison might be helpful, or at least make its way into part of your management process or decision making process. But I would venture to say most of the time would be spent here on Fidelity's website through a few of these different avenues that we had talked about so far. News and research, ETFs is one thing that you want to be mindful of. But having that said, where do you want to start, Albert? I can keep going on anything that we're kind of seeing here, or if you want to set the table for a little bit of maybe context, background on ETFs. I know not everyone maybe is familiar with even what we're saying so far about ETFs. Maybe if you want to tackle that first and foremost, of course, that might be a great place to start. Make sure we're all talking apples to apples here.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and do that. I'll grab the screen real quick. And I think a good place to start, because when we think about, at least when I think about ETFs, my first thought is either sector specific or index specific, right? In other words, if we're thinking about the largest one, SPY, what is that? Well, that's an ETF that tries to mimic the S&P 500, right? So typically when I think about those things, I'm thinking about larger market ideas, maybe even sector specific. And then, of course, you can drill down from there. But I think a good place to start is really with our market and sectors page. So what I'm doing is news and research. I'm going to market and sectors here. And I want to start here because I think this is a good place to kind of get the macro view, and then you can kind of drill down further. Now, you may or may not need this information, but let me just show you where it's at in case you do. So the first thing I want to point out is a couple of things that we have. One is the quarterly market update. And if I click on this, it's going to give me a new window. And this one I think is nice because it gives you an idea of what the economic outlook was. This, of course, would be for the second quarter. As you see, this is from April of 2024. I think it's a great resource for overall market outlook, as well as macro themes to keep tabs on. So that would be a great place to start right there. Going back to this tab over here, this Market Insights tab, we also have a link right here to our team. So if you click on this coaching opportunities, this will actually take you to the trading strategy desk. And this will give you an opportunity to see what events we have going on. If you click all available events, it'll show you everything we've got going on here coming up. And you can, obviously, if there's something that tickles your fancy, by all means, join us. We do different presentations every day, every week about different subjects. So that's just a good resource for you as well. And finally, the last one I want to show you here on this particular page is this quarterly sector update. This one is, a fantastic one as well. This is actually from May 7th. This is Denise Chisholm. She's the Director of Quantitative Market Strategy. this is a nice overview of what she expects coming forward for the next quarter. You can kind of get an idea of the things that she's looking at. She's usually pretty sharp. She's usually got some pretty good ideas. So I highly recommend looking at that when you get an opportunity. So again, this is covering relevant themes to watch basically going forward. So some good resources for the general market. And then from here, I like to go to sectors because again, when we think about ETFs, we're generally thinking about certain themes or certain sectors or maybe even indexes that we are looking at. And the sectors page itself has got quite a bit of information. And from the main tile, this is the main tile I would call this, right? Gives us a lot of information about the different sectors and their performance. Now, there are 11 sectors as defined by the Global Industry Classification Standard or GICS or GICS or however you want to pronounce it, right? And then we can drill down further into industry groups, industries, and finally sub-industries. But we'll stick to sectors for now, just to stick with that kind of general theme. But if you have any questions about the data, you can click on the link in the bottom left. That'll tell you exactly what's going on with these particular industries themselves. So I'm going to open up this sector right here. This is going to give you these. So we have one for each sector, basically, if you scroll down. And up top, the one I like about this is, and here's the information I was talking about. If you ever had any questions about that, it's right here. But the nice thing about this is this table, there's a few things I want to point out here, and that is we can look at performance, of course, on a variety of time frames. And the nice thing about that is you can actually go through and sort these as well. So let's just say, for example, I want to see what's been going on, year to date. And as you can see, communication services, no surprise there, right? You can see that is actually the top performer for the year to date. The other nice thing too is the S&P 500, you'll notice, is still grayed out. So again, just a quick visual to give you an idea of how your sector is looking compared to the overall market, as well as to the other industries themselves. So again, this table is fantastic. You can certainly start a year to date and go further, whatever is important to you, basically, right? If you're trying to find something that maybe has been beaten down over the last month and you want to try to look for something there, you can reverse sort it. And you'll see that energy is down about 3.5% over the last month. That might give you somewhere to jump off from and look for some other ideas there. So again, that's the basic table. On the right here, the second tile is the business cycle. Again, I think this is a fantastic resource because we're often talking about what phase of the business cycle are we in. And from there, you can kind of start to think about maybe I should be focusing on certain aspects. So if we're thinking that we're currently in the late phase, then maybe you're looking at something like consumer staples or real estate or even energy at this stage. If you think we're headed into this recession, then maybe you're looking somewhere in here. And the other resource that we have, you can actually view our current phase right now. This is actually part of our institutional research, but you can take a look and see if you click on the United States, here's where we are, right? We're somewhere in this Q1, Q2 area right here, um, and somewhere in this expansion phase, right? So this will give you some information with regards to what they see happening and some other resources. But again, just a great overview about what's going on with regards to where they see the market at currently. Now, beyond that, we can get down into now back to some of these sectors. So I went with communication services. It'll tell you how many industries are within it. And of course, right across the top, it's going to give you a bunch of different companies that are, of course, popular probably with regards to communication services. You'll also get an opportunity to take a look at another table. This will actually break down the different industries in the sector, right? And again, you can do the same type of thing. You can sort this and figure out what's been doing well. Interactive media services are actually outperforming the overall sector. Media is probably not doing quite as well over the last 3 months. So again, another resource to kind of drill down and see what you can find with regards to actual sectors themselves. And again, there's 11 sectors, so you got the opportunity to cruise through any one of the sectors and decide, if there's something in there maybe that you're interested in, or maybe something you want to pursue, right? And that's kind of where the research leads us, right, Peter? We kind of start large and start to drill down. So maybe from this page, if I decide on something, or if I'm still looking for more information, I know Peter, you were talking about some additional resources with regards to education about ETFs. So I think it'd be a good segue for us to kind of move into that at this point.
Yeah, no, I like that backdrop on kind of what it is that at least for me, what comes to mind is being able to think about how kind of an ETF itself or a basket of goods is able to go ahead and make its way into your portfolio composition. And as you had pointed out adequately, most more times, or at least historically more times than not, there was some type of index, some type of sector industry that you are looking to go ahead, package together, and then go ahead and rather than you having to put on your stock picker hat, do all the research through a particular sector that you're looking to gain that exposure into, maybe do some research on a number of different sector ETFs that might fit the mold. Having that said, let's go ahead, as you had mentioned, start with just a little bit more of this education. Truth be told, with the time that we have in this class, more specifically, I suppose I should say, we try to give some of that high level background foundation into ETFs. But if you are interested in learning a little bit more on a granular level, there's a number of different ways to get to this. News and research, and then navigating towards ETFs. That's where I want to go ahead and start for just a moment. There's always information in this learning category, but truth be told, stick with me here if you are following along, like I know many of you are. News and research, and then clicking on ETFs is going to take you to the ETF research page, which is where we find ourselves now. Among other things that we're going to be talking about, and I'll try to cycle through these maybe quickly just to kind of give you the tip of the iceberg as to what these different categories can be used for. But down below is what I wanted to draw attention towards first and foremost, understanding ETFs, everything from the kind of the what an ETF is at that beginner level, but then also being able to drive a little bit more in depth. Maybe you understand ETF as a product. Maybe you're hearing Albert and myself talk about, okay, maybe different ways to get exposure. But above and beyond that, what are different benefits of ETFs? Maybe you are more familiar with mutual funds. Why might you pick a mutual fund over an ETF or vice versa? A little bit more mechanics, maybe some different myths that you've heard. For instance, if you click on any of these categories, even for me personally being, I would venture to say, the slowest reader on the team, you'd be able to get through these in maybe just about 5 minutes or so. A handful of pretty poignant paragraphs about different perspectives, maybe here, trading flexibility, going back to maybe why ETFs versus mutual funds. ETFs are going to almost be like a mutual fund that trades like a stock. So if you want that flexibility to get into or out of a position throughout the day or a particular time in the day versus having to wait for that net asset value price to be announced and figure out what that's going to be after market close in the case of many mutual funds, maybe some of that flexibility is going to fit the mold for you and why you might want to incorporate ETFs specifically. Taxation, we don't talk a tremendous amount about, but there are maybe some tax differences between the two. So really, I mean, regardless about one individual article, just that theme of being able to actually go through if there is maybe a gap in your level of understanding, or you just even want to further your knowledge that you currently have. I'm always a big fan of that, which is why I think even just a couple minutes pointing out a few of these top level articles, and then also pointing out that there is the view all ETF learning opportunities, which I have launched here. And it's kind of that learning section that's really geared towards all things ETFs, where much of what we had talked about is going to be contained, but then also even more educational content, basics, types of ETFs, getting into maybe different types of advanced ETFs, maybe inverse leveraged target ETFs. I mean, they've got into ETFs these days, Albert, of course, that are leveraged to pretty much just one individual stock, or maybe the inverse of one in particular stock. So I don't think this is an industry that's going away. I've seen it evolve over my time. I'm sure you have as well. So if nothing more, getting a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, not just about mechanically how they work, but then also a little bit more of an education as to, above and beyond what we're going to be able to go through today, how to choose ETFs, going through the different screeners that we have access to, can, I think, be helpful, or if nothing more, worthwhile to go ahead and package together. All right, let's go ahead and let me scroll up for a minute. Let me talk to this research page for just a little bit, Albert, about kind of what it is that we are seeing here, what you should expect. Let's see here. Questions coming through. How can I tell which ones or ETFs are passively versus managed? So there's the way I like to think about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Albert. Usually, I'm thinking about passive management style versus active management style. Through the screener, we can show that, or even through maybe an individual ETF that I can click on here in just a moment. Oftentimes, through their strategy or maybe even their benchmark, they'll talk about whether it's active or passive. But anonymous, I will make sure that we cover that before the end of the session. Don't let me forget, but I'll leave that question up in front of us. Back to some of just this basic navigation, if I may. Really, what we're going to be seeing here, ETF screener, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on. So I might table this for here and now. But once again, all of what I'm talking about for the moment is under the news and research ETF category. It's a great way to go ahead and search for things like Christine, I believe, had actually asked about earlier, maybe some type of income strategy. Others are asking about maybe different technicals that are factored in, maybe a certain sector like Albert was mentioning. All those things and more. ETF Screener is going to be one avenue, or probably your best bet to being able to refine your search, kind of scan the marketplace for these, couple thousand ETFs that are out there. So we will spend adequate amount of time on the ETF Screener. Up above, ETF market movers, much like you would see with the stock research page, there is this drop down menu. Defaults, I believe, to the US equity, which makes sense. And you can even do sub searches here for the top 5 day gainers, this year's gainers, different averages, losers, this, that, the other, and then even breaking it down. The reason I show this is that so many of these different places on Fidelity's website have these drop down menus that are kind of hidden in plain sight. And I think once you've got that basic understanding of the website, or kind of how these drop down menus work, you've got the ability to break it down between U.S. equity, sector equity. You saw international. The list goes on and on. Commodities. Hearing quite a bit more about the narrative on how commodities are maybe in this cycle, or super cycle, as it's called, right, Albert? So maybe getting some type of exposure towards really anything that you're seeing here: bonds, taxable, domestic, municipal, you name it, everything's here. And it's really just that top level view to go ahead and search for kind of what's been happening, whether it's on a specific time frame, or whether maybe it's based on volume for flows that are going through. Different ways to have kind of managed accounts. That's fair. ETF portfolio builder. I don't talk about this too often. I know in a session I've done with Constantine, he had a pretty good, 5 minutes or so to discuss it. I think the way I would dovetail into this tool, if it's of interest to you and kind of getting started, is that more times than not, whether it's me investing, whether it's Albert, whether it's each and every one of you in the audience, you've probably got a few things in mind. You've got your purpose for investing, you've got your time horizon, you've got your risk tolerance. Being able to look at maybe different sectors, like Albert had pointed out, different industries, being able to factor in maybe where we are in that business cycle, and having some type of framework to how you are going to construct your portfolio is important. And really, that is what this tool is here to try to demonstrate, or if nothing more, maybe visualize. How much domestic versus foreign stock do you want? How much in bonds versus maybe short term do you want or potentially need? If you've got a big purchase on the horizon, maybe you need to put something into maybe more conservative asset class by nature. There's different ETFs that might be able to fit the mold for that as well. So if you're interested, feel free to click on this, click get started. It's more about kind of what we're seeing here, different diagrams to say, okay, how much do you maybe want to put into certain asset classes, and then maybe what ETFs might fit the mold for those. We can certainly circle back if anyone has interest on this, or maybe wants me to demo. Wouldn't take but a few minutes, but just kind of back to this top level theme, at least wanted to be able to speak to, I think, maybe the benefit behind a tool like this versus just piling into any of the suggestions. Search by stock, this one that's been around for quite some time. It's taken maybe different visual iterations, but being at Fidelity as long as I have, this used to be pretty common, especially when ETFs began to trade at reduced commissions. We had our partnership with iShares, and clients would always say, you know what, I read an article over the weekend about XYZ, ABC. Yeah, sure, I can go out and buy a couple of them, but it just sounds like that whole industry maybe has something going for it. Is there an ETF maybe that tracks those couple positions, or maybe others in that specific industry sector, whatever it might be. And that's kind of the theme of this tool here. Obviously, with NVIDIA, I think it's hard to turn on the news networks and not hear kind of about the story behind NVIDIA, AMD. Intel not doing so hot, not doing so well on a day like today, just individual basis. So maybe you are looking for an ETF that holds NVIDIA and AMD, but maybe not Intel, or maybe you want a little bit of everything. Maybe you would like some exposure to NVIDIA and also Amazon, or maybe also Bank of America. Essentially, if we were to click on, let's say, NVIDIA, click on Amazon, and I'll throw in maybe an outlier. I'll throw in maybe Bank of America just to see. We'd be able to click on this button here, view matching ETFs. And what that is designed to do for us is kind of tell us, is there any exposure to NVIDIA? How much? Any exposure to Amazon? How much? It doesn't look like maybe Bank of America had anything there. So I'll maybe remove that one for just a moment. But speaking to this here and now, it's going to show you, okay, how much is there on the individual basis, and then how much is the total exposure. Albert, I think this is good, and I'll show on the research page in just a moment. The other part of the importance behind it is sometimes you may be looking for exposure, but potentially that's too much. Maybe you're not looking for an ETF, which is practically just this stock or just a kind of leveraged exposure to a particular stock. Maybe you're looking for some exposure, but want it maybe a little bit more evenly split between these couple names. Not picking or choosing any of these. This one looks to be about close to 11 and 8%. Maybe that's kind of a better mix. Maybe it only makes up 20% of a portfolio or just shy of that. Maybe that's going to leave some room for other individual names that you might also want some exposure to versus making up a tremendous amount of that portfolio. So that is why we take a step back, completely up to you how you would like to go ahead and kind of look for ETFs, look for the exposure that you're trying to gain to any names. And you can plug in anything that you want here, completely up to you. But being able to see what those breakdowns are might then be able to allow you to do a little bit more research. So let me go ahead and actually just choose on one of those. Just didn't click on the first, didn't click on the last. It was a Nuveen Growth Opportunities ETF. That's fine. A random ETF here, folks. That's all that we are looking at. And really all that's designed to do is launch us into a specific ETF, and then more specifically, the research page for ETFs. Now, this is going to be laid out very similarly to how the stocks research page is laid out. We've kind of got this quote over here towards the left. We've got our chart. Then down below, maybe different ratings. There is the kind of Morningstar FactSet ratings for oftentimes ETFs, maybe mutual funds that you're looking at. The ratings for stocks that we have here are going to be a little bit different. Starmine equity reports would usually be found here. The other benefit here down below is going to be these top holdings. We talked about how maybe you did want some exposure. I think my examples were NVIDIA and Amazon, but wanted some other room for other companies. Maybe no mistake based off the name of this. There's going to be the likes of Microsoft, Apple, Google. How much of these other companies are weighting into the total of the holdings? How many holdings in general are there? Where are they maybe located? Maybe where are they structured? That's what these type of research is designed for us to be able to do, is kind of look at the characteristics. Each of these, much like we know about the stock research page, is going to be able to allow us to drive a little bit differently. And the reason I wanted to start to click on some of these was to speak to Anonymous's question earlier. If you come to the usually overview, or more times than not composition, that's where we are going to find what the kind of high level stated objective is going to be for the ETF. So it's going to give us a breakdown on kind of the tickets to play, so to speak. What is the objective for this ETF? And then the manager out there is going to go look to actually find companies that fit the mold. Now, investment philosophy, Anonymous, to your question earlier, I was breaking it down between what's referred to as passively managed versus actively managed. This is an example of an actively managed fund. And taking a step back, really what that means is that if we have a passively managed ETF, really what the manager, quote unquote, is there to do is just make sure that things are kind of pumping along with its index that it's tracking. What is the not just benchmark, but what is it designed to do? If the stated objective is something like we would find maybe with, let's switch over to SPY for just a moment. I apologize. If we switch over to SPY for a moment, and once this loads, well, it's passively managed. That's the investment philosophy. And what's its objective? It's seeking to really provide investment results that before expenses are going to correspond generally to the price and yield performance of the S&P 500. So that's the stated need. Doesn't mean that they're, lazy or anything of that nature. That is the purpose of this S&P 500 fund. So it is passively managed, and really what it's trying to do is replicate, mimic, or give you kind of that exposure that corresponds to the S&P 500. Now, if I went back to that fund, what was it? Was it NewGo? Hopefully that's correct. I'll go back to NewGo for just a minute or two. And this is really well, I'll start to wrap this up and then maybe hand it back over to you, Albert, for just a little bit. In thinking about this research, actively managed. Okay, so it's seeking long-term capital appreciation. Well, aren't we all, right? But really, it's then going to go ahead and give you the parameters for kind of what it can be invested in. The name itself, growth opportunities. Okay, probably something like growth, maybe from the balance sheet perspective, maybe where not just they've been, but where they're going in the future. So actively managed means that that fund manager has a little bit more flexibility and leeway versus really trying to directly mimic like we had seen with the S&P 500. And that is where they're going to be able to have more or less weighting towards different investment products. It's also why they can really compose a portfolio of just 45 positions at this very moment in time versus some other ETFs, which might have twice that, maybe 3, 4 times that many investments. It just really depends on how spread thin they want these investment weightings to be. The last few things I'll say about just this in particular composition page down below, we talked about it maybe from a sector standpoint or a strategy standpoint. Maybe you are looking to kind of get outside of the US borders. Maybe you're looking for some exposure overseas, Europe, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, really whatever that might be. So breaking it down between region and country for this ETF, obviously not really making waves, but if you were to be looking for something like a, I don't know, you name it, global, momentum fund or something of that nature. Well, okay, global tells us something, but even this little square is going to go ahead and tell us a tremendous amount more. When we say global, what do we really mean by that? So that's more or less just the kind of breakdowns that you'll notice for things like region, country, market cap, style, meaning the large to small cap, growth to value, and then down below, of course, some sector and industry exposure, like Albert had walked us through. Every single one of these tabs, once again, very adjacent to what the stock page is going to look like, distributions and expenses, whether there is any type of expense ratio, just kind of the cost of doing business, especially for an actively managed fund. Do they pay some type of distributions out to you? Ratings and analysis, we already talked a little bit about. Comparisons is another good one that I'll stick on for just a moment. Usually what you'd see is maybe there's a similar ETF that you want to either try to compare it to or maybe have one generated for you. Two other points, and then Albert, I promise I will kick it up to you for a minute. If I was to go to XLE for a minute, I'm sure many of you have heard of this. It's the Sector Spider Energy Select ETF. If you click on this comparisons, well, it's going to go ahead and give you this table of a handful of different similarly structured ETFs. And then it's going to maybe give you some of the differences there. I mean, this is a fund with nearly 40 billion under management, and the next one over happens to have 1.34, 8.78. Maybe that's going to make a difference to you, as well as breaking down maybe what some of these expense ratios are going to be. You can break this down to more of a table format as well with the similar ETPs, as well as being able to kind of put in your own symbols, maybe that you already have in mind, and then you can really compare and contrast. Once again, that theme of drop-down menus more than meets the eye to just the basic facts and performance, but then actually be able to get down into a number of different characteristics or attributes. The last thing that I'll say, just back on that composition, Albert, and then I'll open it up over to you for a minute, is going to be that the composition is important because I've talked to a number of investors over the past that said, "Oh yeah, I really want energy exposure, so I'm going to go ahead and get into XLE." Perfectly fine. But do keep in mind, you want to be mindful of what it is that you're actually investing in. Had that conversation where they say, you know what, oil was up, gas was up, this was moving, this was down, this was moving all around. Why is maybe XLE not performing? That's when you want to peek under the hood for just at least the first time into the fund before you're making that purchase. Exxon and Chevron make up nearly what, just about 40% or so of this fund. Now, given these are such huge companies, maybe that's warranted in an ETF like this. I think my point is just make sure there's no surprises in the ETF that you're looking at. There's other exposures out there that are maybe more equally weighted towards all of these names, or maybe incorporate some others that this fund specifically does not. Doesn't make this one good, doesn't make this one bad. You just want to be mindful of what is it that you are looking to gain through your investment, and then make sure that through the composition, whether it's the individual names, market caps, or regions, that it is going to be one that is accomplishing kind of what your stated goal is going to be. All right, that's probably more than folks know. Once again, a little bit deeper than I even had intended on, but hopefully, if not the exact, kind of tiles or tabs that we reviewed make sense to you. Maybe some of this is going to go ahead and be able to be factored into your own decision making. And I'd encourage everyone to take a look at really all of these, at least to give yourself a little bit of an acquaintance as to the information that's here. That way, you're more familiar with kind of where to draw on that info, if and when you want to go ahead and maybe do a little bit more research.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of great information, Peter. Again, I think what Peter's point is that, it's good to go for us to go through these things, but for you to really get a grasp of what's happening, it's all definitely good for you to kind of fly through and click on the different links and see what's going on because, for me at least, that's the best way for me to learn. But certainly give you an opportunity to kind of understand what it is that's available to you with regards to that particular research. So that being said, I think probably now is a great time for us to take a look at the ETF screener, which I think personally is one of my favorite tools, Peter, whether it's stock or ETF screener. There's so much you can do with this particular tool. And really, if you have an idea of what you're looking for, the screener is the place to go to, right? Regardless of the research, if you know exactly what you want, this will be the place to go. But let me show you a couple of different ways to actually get to this. The first I'll show you, of course, is from the research page itself that we're on, the news and research, and of course ETFs, which brings us to this page here. On the left-hand side, you'll see it actually says ETF screener. And this, from here, we can actually start off from, a base that we have an idea. So for example, if I click on sector and I scroll down to say technology, if I click on that, it's going to take me to that ETF screener right away, and it's going to have it preloaded with some technology ETFs. Now, the nice thing is it's going to give you a little bit of a background as to what they are looking at right over here. And you can see I've got 121 choices here I can take a look at. Now, certainly that's a lot of information, probably more than I need, and then we can get into that in just a moment, how to break it down. But that's one way to get there. The other way to get there, of course, is screener tools. And this will get you to just the ETF screener without anything filled in. But another way that I wanted to show you, because I think this is very useful as well, going back to that sectors tabs, if I go back to this information technology, and I'm looking at this is where my area of interest is. Right here, we can see where it says find investments. And now you've got a choice. Now, if we're looking for ETFs, I can simply click on this ETFs button. And it's going to take me to the exact same idea as before. It's going to pre-filter things out and give me a good launching pad for my search. So as you can see, it's the same exact number of funds. It'll tell you a little bit about what they're trying to do up here. But now at least I've got a good jumping off point for my ETFs. So let's take a look at how this might work with regards to research. Now, if I was doing this, there are certain things that I'm going to look for. I just think a lot of traders look for as well. So let's just kind of look at a couple of different ideas that maybe might make or break our choice of ETF. So the first thing I always take a look at is going into, for example, trading. So I'm going to look at the trading characteristics. I'm going to look at volume. And for me, I want to see something that's got a good 90-day average. So I'm going to go ahead and click 90-day average. And let's just say I want something very high right away. Okay, you can see that we're going to be losing a lot of these ETFs. We go from 121 down to 22. So let me take that off for just a minute because I think this is a very important point to kind of take in here. And if I don't do anything, if I just click 90-day average and don't take a choice, it'll actually give me that column, which again is sortable without taking anything away. Now, if I click on the tab itself, I can sort this low to high. As you can see, if I go by high, SMH, 8.3 million shares on average for the daily volume. If I reverse it, now you can see some of the issues inherent to ETFs. Now, I'm not saying that the Gabelli Automation ETF is a bad ETF by any means, but it's got 4.7 million in assets, and the average daily volume is 31 shares. So my caution to you is this: just because an ETF might fit specifically what you're trying to do, you might want to be careful with regards to liquidity, right? And that's really one of the first things that I look at. If I'm getting into an ETF that only has, 4.7 million, this one only has 1.7, this is not even a million, right? It only trades 31 shares. Even if you do get into it at a decent price, getting out of it could be very tricky. So just be very aware of the actual size of the ETF itself and make sure that it is something that you feel comfortable with investing in or trading. So if I go back and I say very high, that's going to limit me down. That's going to bring me down to 22 different ETFs that are now available to me. So now, again, I'm looking at something that's trading 200,000 or more on any given day, still focused on technology. And as you can see, it's a little bit different list, right? We've already taken out quite a bit by just getting rid of some of the lesser traded ETFs. Now, from here, I can say, well, maybe 22 is still a bit much. And now I can start to kind of figure out what it is that I want to see out of my ETF. Now, the first one here is some basic facts, right? You can limit it by at market price for sure. You can limit it by asset class. You can limit it by a lot of different things. So for me, I'm going to see if I can go through here and I want to take a look at exposures. I want to take a look at sector exposure, right? Because we've been talking about that for quite a while. We've been saying that, sector exposure, sometimes you want to look at a specific sector, and you want to make sure you have the ability to see that exposure in that ETF. And I know that I want to see information technology, right? So we've already talked about that. I'm going to click on information technology here, and it doesn't really take anything else. So all of these have information technology exposure. Now the question is, how much exposure do you want to have? Do you want to have just a passing exposure, or do you really want it to be focused on information technology? So let's just say, for example, I've decided that I want this thing to have at least 75% exposure to information technology. So now right away you can see I've taken out an additional 7 of those. And now I'm down to 15. So here's where we stand so far. I started with the sector. I knew I wanted to look at technology. Then I knew I wanted to make sure that whatever it was that I was looking at had adequate daily volume to support an investment for me or a trade for me, whatever it is that I'm doing at that particular time. And then from there, I wanted to make sure that, listen, even though I'm looking at technology, I do want to make sure that it's information technology that I'm looking at. And I want to make sure it's not just, kind of invested in information technology. I want to be heavily invested in information technology. And now, so I put this at 75% to 100%. And now I'm down to 15 different funds that I can take a look at. So now that I've done that, I can start to see if there's anything else I want to add to this. Now, I'm just working on the search criteria. Obviously, you can take a look at any of these other tabs, but we're just trying to get it down to a manageable number. And I still think that maybe I might want to reduce it even further here at this point. So maybe I want to look at something different. So we've looked at some trading characteristics. We've looked at some exposures. Maybe I want to look at performance here. And maybe I want to say something that I want to look at the price performance over the last, call it year, right? And so I want to take a look at what's been happening for the last year. And I want to say, certainly I want to look at just very high performance. Now, being the technology sector, this is probably not going to take out too many. As you can see, it only took out 2. So we might even have to go a bit further here, right? We might have to look at something that's really been up quite a bit. Let's just say we'll go from 50% and higher on this particular one. Now we're down to 3. All right. So what I've done with the screener is this. I've started with a general theme of technology. I narrowed it down to make sure that I can find things that are actively traded, at least to my standards. Your standards can certainly be different. You can change those numbers as you will. But I went for 200,000 roughly and higher. And then I wanted to make sure that I had at least information technology exposure and a lot of it. And now finally, I wanted something that's been doing really well for the last 52 weeks. So that leaves me with three choices here. I'm down to the SMH, SOXQ, and SOXX. And what do I notice? It's a lot of semiconductors. So now I'm down to these three different ETFs that have really hit the parameters that I'm looking for. And now I have the ability to kind of look and see, all right, well, maybe this, I can compare these three and decide which one I want to use. Now, again, once we get down to these three, the job is not done, right? Now that we've gotten down to three, all we're trying to do is make our research easier to do, right? And so I can start and go through by clicking on SMH. I can start to do some research on SMH and go through the steps that Peter just showed us on the research page to determine whether or not this is something that I want to be in my portfolio. I can go through the composition. I can go through all the different ratings. I can do whatever I want to with this one. But again, the screener isn't the end of research. It's to get you to that research tab, right? Is to get you to a smaller list of focused ETFs that you can then go and do the dirty work, right? Really get into them and start doing that research and deciding if this is something that needs to be added to your portfolio. Now, the other thing I will show you real quickly is getting back to that screener tab itself. So I'm going to clear all on this one. And we had a question earlier about dividends. And so there's a couple of different things we can do here, right? We can actually look at ETFs that focus on dividends, and we could actually screen it out ourselves if we wanted to. But a couple of different things we can do here. And I'll show you one more time. Fixed income, for example. And we should be able to find, I think this is where the dividends are, Peter. If it's not right, by all means, correct me. I think it's
With
maybe
I didn't mean to step on your toes. Go with the avenue that you want. With the stock research page, there is kind of quite a bit
oh,
that's dedicated towards dividends. With the
yeah, thank you.
ETFs, there is the fixed income, which is great. But then it's weird, or at least in my opinion, it's weird. I shouldn't say that, but it's under tax considerations, which I suppose makes sense. We'd seen that in some of the education about some of the tax, benefits or drawbacks to ETFs versus mutual funds. But if you're on the actual screener itself, like you had pulled up when you had found those few results, on the left-hand margin, towards the bottom, and I can show it also through an example, but since you're right here and now, under tax
Oh,
considerations, there is what's called the distribution yield, which is kind of similar to what you would call dividend yield, of course, and then that dividend paid for the past 12 months. But it's a bit of an oddball. It's the one thing that's probably far off the beaten path from how it's shaped up in the stock research page.
yeah, I was looking for, I thought we had one that was specifically said dividend paying ETFs, but maybe that was a previous iteration
They're
of
always changing stuff on us, right? They
exactly.
keep us on our toes, pull the rug out. So it could have been. You're probably right.
But in any event, we can certainly take a look and start to go through that entire process once again, based on dividends, right? It's something that we want to take and figure out this distribution yield. Like I haven't sorted it yet. I just want to know what the distribution yield is, and you can see there's a lot of high yielding distributions here. And we can start to filter that out and say, listen, if it's more than 10%, I want to know about it. And then again, go through the process of starting to eliminate different names and start to drill down into what exactly it is that we're trying to do. So that was just a quick one, but I'll pass it to you, Peter. I'm sure you've got some ideas about how you'd like to look at the screener as well, and ideas to share with everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, it's so open forum. I think there's kind of a way that I wanted to try to work in another question that was coming through. Let me grab it from you. Not reinventing the wheel. Honestly, I kind of piggybacked off of the example that you had started to share so far. We'll give this just a moment or two to load, folks. Bear with my computer. It's been having a hard time lately. All right, here we go. This should be coming through. Volume did the same thing. But then I started to go ahead and add on this distribution yield as well, like we were talking about. I started just with very high and high. Be mindful, folks. Sometimes a very high, not a negative connotation, but maybe it's in a industry that's having a hard time. Maybe that yield that's being paid out is due to the ETF itself as a whole coming down. So just make sure that there's that balancing act between capital appreciation in current income. And you want to make sure that if you are getting kind of enticed or doing a screen, I should say, for a high yield, just like we would see with an individual stock name, make sure it's not an accidental yield. Make sure that it is an industry or sector maybe that you do have that confidence behind or your bullish thesis, like Albert was talking about previously. So to carry this forward, very high, completely up to you. You could do medium. The other benefit is, goodness gracious, something paying a 92% yield. I don't know, that's the product for me, but might be for somebody else out there. So you can also tone this down if you just wanted to go ahead and type in free form. Maybe 35% is about as far as you want to take it. Maybe those results are going to go ahead and begin to kind of dwindle down. So do keep that in mind, just like Albert was mentioning, adding these, but then also being able to modify them. The benefit of having kind of these predefined categories and somewhat of a curve here is that it's going to go ahead and at least show you what the maybe kind of high for the categories are versus the lows, and then different tranches, so to speak, in between. But that doesn't stop you if you just happen to like round numbers, or maybe you don't. 5.02 for some reason rings out to you. Do keep in mind that you can really type in anything that you want here, and that should either increase or reduce the results. Let me go ahead and factor in a question from Jeffrey. Can you filter based on momentum ETFs? Jeffrey, two ways that I would approach questions like this when I was working with clients on the phones on the daily basis. One, I would say, you know what? The screener itself doesn't necessarily have a tool that just says, momentum ETF, so to speak, but if you want to search for something kind of in the internet sphere, maybe you just hop on Google, take a look at, momentum ETFs, top performing momentum ETFs. Maybe there is an ETF provider. What do we got here? Just picking out names: Yield Max, iShares, ProShares, Valkyrie, whatever it might be. Maybe you have a specific ETF provider that you have a lot of faith in. Maybe you can search for iShares Momentum ETF and see if something pops up. Now, I would say, just like Albert did earlier, that's just the start of your journey, so to speak. That's more than likely not the one to go with. Maybe you do wind up with that one. However, keep in mind those other research tools that we had talked about. Once you maybe have a momentum ETF, maybe that is a foot in the door. Then you can go back to that research, like we talked about, take a look at maybe comparisons to other momentum ETFs, and maybe you'll start to go ahead and actually have a short list of ones that you do then have the ability to do some additional research on. Now, over to kind of the first point. Do we have the ability to actually select momentum, so to speak? If you just tried to type out, as long as I'm spelling right, momentum coming through. Well, no criteria found. But let's just take a step back and think about it. What does momentum mean to you, Jeffrey, or what does it mean to Albert? What does it mean to me? Maybe there's some nuances. Maybe there's something that you want to post in. I'm happy to try to search for it. But what I'm driving at is momentum to me means something that maybe has had a trend that's intact, and maybe that trend is increasing. And there is some momentum behind a move. So, what's a workaround, or at least one avenue, or something that I want your mind to be thinking about? Fit in whatever you think momentum is to you, and then maybe down below there's something that'll speak to that. Here under the technicals, we've got things that cater towards what price is doing in relation to various moving averages. There's different classic pattern events that you can look for. There are different multi-bar candlesticks that you can look for, different oscillators you can search for, indicators that you can kind of go ahead and look at as well. So maybe to you, momentum is something that is kind of far and above its 20-day moving average. Well, if you want something that has momentum, probably not going to be negative, right? You can go ahead and kind of either start to check on very high, medium, or you can just type in, hey, I don't want anything that is below its 20-period moving average. That might not have momentum, at least from the past 20 days worth of closes being factored into its price. Once again, just one way to try to gauge momentum in my simple mind. So maybe you're looking for something that at least is holding its 20-day moving average, and is going to be above that. Well, now our searches got cut almost in half. We're down to 90. Maybe you're looking for some strong momentum, actually want it maybe a couple percent above that 20-period moving average. You can do that. Look at that difference. The ones that are just above their moving average versus 2% above, our search results just went from 90 down to 6. That's a pretty wild reduction. So that's going to be completely up to you. And once again, we're looking at also ones that have this distribution yield. So if you wanted to open up this distribution, maybe down to something like maybe 5 is too stringy, maybe 4.5 is what you want to go with. That's going to go ahead and then open up the door to additional names or ETFs that are out there. So do keep that in mind as far as that. Is there a search functionality for momentum? Not specifically, but oftentimes there's kind of a creative way to try to draw the mold as to, well, what does momentum mean to me? Go look for those characteristics that kind of speak towards momentum. That was just one example, holding a moving average. But of course, different indicators or oscillators. Oftentimes, these oscillators, if you look at bullish, they will have different types of indicators in them. Here's momentum right here. So there are ways around it, even if when you're searching, it's kind of hidden behind relative strength index, RSI. Stochastics, Williams percent R. There's numerous momentum indicators that if you are familiar with maybe a few of those, or maybe you've kind of got your favorite, you should be able to go ahead and actually find kind of a way around in order to speak towards what your trade thesis is, even if it's not specifically kind of in a category of a momentum ETF versus maybe a value ETF or something of that nature. All right, let me pause for a moment, take a look, see. Hadn't seen any other ETFs coming through. I'll open it up. Any other Albert and I kept it, brief. Once again, this wasn't thought to be kind of the end all be all screen that's going to really find those diamonds in the rough and the next best investment, but it's more about how to use the tool. Any other types of maybe criteria that you all out there in the audience factor in? Feel free. I'll try to maybe implement that or kind of add it towards anything like we're seeing. But I think when it comes down to it, you can go through these different categories kind of one by one in order to view things that we had already pointed out, some of which we had not, and be able to add some. And also, if you want that 50,000-foot view, this view all functionality is pretty good also, just to be able to, at a glance, kind of view all of those different categories, as well as those sub filters that you do have access to. Christine asking about SMH. Tell you what, as promised, I'll pivot off of the screener for a minute, Albert, unless you had something else. Actually, tell you what, one last thing, and Albert, I open it up to you as well. I was just going to say, bear in mind, you might have shown this already, Albert. I apologize if I was distracted. This is just that top level research as well. Search criteria. It's going to go ahead and cater towards those fields off on the left that we have added. A couple things. One, if there is a screen that you have built that you enjoy, please, save to my screens. That's going to allow you to have your momentum yield or whatever you want to call it, momentum yield screen. You hit save, and then the next time that you're coming in, you're going to be able to come to my screens, and that's going to go ahead and pull up for you. That way you don't have to reinvent the wheel. More times than not, you're going to create a screen and then maybe come back to it a week later, maybe come back to it a month later and see what has kind of gotten into your results, what has maybe left your results over time. And then, of course, going back to the theme of lots of info just being hidden in plain sight, basic facts, income characteristics, performance and risk, technicals, being able to kind of just with the click of the mouse, look at all of these different ways to compare, contrast the ETFs, is going to be really the next best thing into being able to hopefully help you with your decision-making process when it comes down to it. Let's see. Can you point out the side-by-side up to 4 ETF comparison page? Yes, let me try to get back to that. What was, not these. Let's see. Let me try to find a symbol here that I can go through. What is this? JEPQ. Okay, so if I was to come to news and research and then ETFs, this one's for you, Anonymous. Couple different ways this could be done. You can try to select a few on that screener page that we were just on. But also if you are typing in, what I say, JEPQ, was it? I hope so. And if not, we can always go back to SPY comparisons. So any ETF that you are looking for, if you come to comparisons, what that will do for you is give a handful down below. Yeah, I was kind of worried about that. SPY, tried and true, the original. Hopefully won't let me down here. Comparisons. This is a simple way to go ahead and look. You can also go ahead and add some. So if you wanted to take a look at VOO, you can hit add. If you wanted to look at IVV and hit add. Apologize, folks. Don't mean to cough in your ear there. Down below, this is where you can also go ahead and take a look at these few, the different differences between them, and then have this basic facts versus short long-term performance ratings, this, that, the other. Anonymous, hopefully that is what you are looking for. The screener also has the ability to go ahead and kind of view that information, but the comparisons or the research in general, more times than not, the best avenue in order to do some other kind of more in-depth research, I suppose. All right, last thing I wanted to do here. What were we talking about? We were talking about SMH. I think you had that one pulled up. Just to kind of piggyback off that example, and Christine, I know you had put that symbol in the search field as well. One thing I had promised that I'm not going to pull up Active Trader Pro here and now, just because with my luck, my system might get bogged down or crash out on me, but very similar functionality, folks. In Chart Plus, if you do have a ETF that you're looking at, or maybe you want to see how one ETF compares to another, you've got the ability up here in the top right corner to click on compare. What that is going to do for you is maybe you want to see, okay, how did the SMH perform in comparison to the S&P 500 or to SPY? And then you could take a look at kind of that comparison functionality. Active Trader Pro has a relative strength comparison. And if you're looking at this price relative or RSC, and you add that type of indicator, what that should do once you apply it is be able to go ahead and show down below, okay, well, how did one of the symbols that I am charting kind of perform in contrast to the other? I like Active Trader Pro of this version because it is able to go ahead and kind of, I think, maybe be a little bit more apparent. Some of you that might have seen us on market briefings, I've got actually a tab specifically labeled RSC, where I can look at one product versus the other and then see what that relative strength, relative, I should say, underperformance or outperformance has been over a certain time period. But that just gets back to the question that was asked at the very, very beginning of the session. Would we be looking at Fidelity's website or Active Trader Pro? Both of them kind of have that capability of the relative strength comparison. But I think that's another avenue that gets back to once you have done some research, maybe you want to go ahead and take a look at, is a certain sector or industry maybe been kind of under pressure and underperforming the marketplace, and then maybe beginning to turn. Maybe there's a new trend that's going to be intact. And oftentimes what we're looking for is that opportunity cost. We're looking to go ahead and have our money working for us and relatively outperform the market, if not other types of similar products or maybe even individual names in that industry. Maybe you're looking at SMH and we're thinking, should I maybe get the type of industry ETF for that specific semiconductor space? Or maybe should I go with a, quote unquote AMD? Should I go with NVIDIA? Should I go with another? This type of tool doesn't mean that you're going to go ahead and get your answer, but it will point towards the fact of, for a time, AMD was outperforming SMH, and then maybe it looks like it's potentially underperforming. So it's just another tool or way to analyze that hopefully will help out with your decision making. Obviously, that's a little bit more of the technical tilt towards things, whereas most of what we had talked about so far has some technical to it, but also a little bit more maybe fundamentally biased. So I wanted to go ahead and at least just shine a light on that quick comparison, which I know we do in most of our other sessions, but at least just wanted to show that as promised since it was asked early on as to different avenues of that. 1 minute to spare, something I have never said in my educational career here at Fidelity Investments, but of course, want to go ahead and open it up to you, Albert. Thoughts? Hopefully, folks out there had some fun being able to see just a few different ways. I mean, endless possibilities of how you can even use some of these tools, some of the tools we didn't even get to. But I'm with you, Albert. I think the screener tool one that just has endless possibilities. Hopefully, that's one that folks will be able to go ahead and dive in head first and feel pretty comfortable and confident in looking at different results and then diving into some of those other research pages as well. But always love to hear your thoughts. I don't mean to deadhead the conversation. I'll certainly let you tackle anything else on your mind or close us out with any questions. But I had fun. Hopefully, folks found it valuable too.
Hey, I was just the co-pilot today, but glad to be here by all means, Peter. It's always fun to share time with you. I would just say this, the as I said, that ETF screener, that I think that's one of my favorite tools of any tool that we have, whether it's the ETF or the stock. But really just get in there and mess around with it. And the really cool part, I'm actually glad you brought that up, Peter, is that view all. That gives you a pretty bird's eye view of everything you can look at. And if you want to pick multiple at a time, you can definitely do that because that might make it a little bit easier for you. But the ETF screener, I think it is just a fantastic tool. It really gets you drilled down into what it is that you're trying to find. And once you do that, then you can kind of figure out whether or not these are the things you want to add to your trading plan or your portfolio. But I would say that the best way to learn how this works, I mean, as Peter said, we only scratched the surface. In fact, Peter, if you don't mind, while you're there, back on that volume one, once you're there, if you click on show the chart, there's another way to look at it too. And I forgot about that part, but you can do show the chart. And if you do that, then you can actually just kind of do a slider and decide where you want to put things at. So again, a lot of ways you can do this. A lot of information you can find on this ETF screener. I would highly encourage you to make this a centerpiece of your research for ETFs. There's so many different things you can look and search for. So yeah, the goal here today was not to have everybody run out and start buying ETFs. The goal here was to show you what tools we have available to us and use them if ETFs are of interest to you, and use them to figure out which ETFs might be suitable for your portfolio. So hopefully everyone learned something. As always, we really appreciate you being here. Beyond that, I hope everyone has a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.